Hello, everyone, and welcome to TBR's webinar, The Past, Present, and Future of IT Business Models. What you don't know will hurt you. With TBR Principal Analyst Geoff Woollacott. I'm Justin Sargent, and I'm hosting today's webinar. There is a disruption in the IT market, one that is changing the way IT is purchased, implemented, and delivered. Traditional on-premise data center construction is constrained by hardware limitations, while cloud-delivered solutions are being unleashed through the use of analytics. The disruption is accelerating the speed at which companies engage, and late adopters will be left behind. Never before has the IT market seen this kind of disruption, which simultaneously renders traditional models obsolete and offers new opportunity amid the chaos. Vendors prepared for the shifting market will remain successful amid this global upheaval. This webinar will be a historical summation of drivers causing this transformation of IT and how these disruptions will shape the future of the market. Before I pass this over to Geoff, there are a few housekeeping items I'd like to cover. First, we will be recording today's session and posting it on our YouTube site, TBRI channel. We encourage you to visit our channel to watch this presentation or any of the others we've posted. Second, we'd like to hear your opinions and thoughts on the material we're presenting. Please send any questions or comments to the Q&A or chat function. Geoff will address them at the end of the presentation. Or, if you'd like to set up a client inquiry for more detailed discussion, please reach out directly to either me or the analyst at the end of the webinar and set up that discussion. Third, we'll send out the slides to everyone registered for today's webcast within 24 hours of the conclusion of the webinar. You can also find the slides, as well as other thought leadership pieces, webinars, and commentaries on SlideShare at www.slideshare.net/TBR_market_insight. Now let me introduce Principal Analyst for Software and BI, Geoff Woollacott. Prior to joining TBR, Geoff owned Renaissance Group, a boutique market research firm founded in 1991, serving blue-chip clients such as IBM, HP, and EMC. Renaissance Group, or RGI, conducted ongoing competitor assessments of IT vendor GTM strategies, operational benchmarking studies, M&A support, and distribution channel satisfaction studies. Geoff has also been a columnist for Neshoba Publications and GlobalComment.com, and early in his career was an end-user and reseller salesperson for Arrow Electronics and a marketing manager for Arrow Field Service. He designed the company's first third-party maintenance program before working at Technology Financial Services as a principal in charge of the company's IT hardware vendor practice. Geoff's years of experience and knowledge of the IT market have given him the expertise necessary to conduct today's webinar, which will focus on the threats and opportunities the shifting market dynamics pose to all industry players. And with that, let me hand this over to Geoff.
Thank you, Justin, and welcome to the webinar. I'm just sitting here making sure I can get to the right transitions. There's a picture of you to guarantee that I am as quote-unquote experienced as that bio just said. It read more like an obituary to me, but I guess I have been at it for a while. What this webinar really is, quite frankly, is me taking what I knew from the years I have been in this industry, and as I was looking at the changes, trying to grapple with hanging on to what I knew to explain what was going on. And what I finally had to realize is I had to let go of what I knew to figure out what is going on. And so the slides that I'm about to show you are largely a progression of the thinking I had over the last 2 years as I've been spending a lot of time, a lot of my free time, drive time to and from work, trying to understand just what is happening. And the recent earnings results, as you folks have probably seen, have indicated that there's a lot of people who are trying to figure this out, and it's evidenced by the number of you that are on. So let me just give a little bit of procedural work here. I'm about to show you what I call the younger folks here, when they see me at whiteboards, they joke they're my Jackson Pollock prints, because they're these messy sort of slides and my hands are moving around and I'm clicking things, trying to figure it out. So this is the most recent one that I have. So I'll put it up real quick, then I'm going to go through some definitions, and then for the balance of it, I will be essentially taking the Jackson Pollock and deconstructing it into the pieces to explain them as I understand them, or as I believe them to be. And then at the end, I'll try to net it out. It's also a way to make sure I don't forget something along the way. There's a ton of things going on in this industry. And at that point, I will try to curate your questions, answer as many of them as I can during the time allotted. I will stay longer than the hour if anybody is interested and field as many as I can. And then if there are unanswered ones at the end of this webinar, I commit to you that I will email back to you with a top-of-mind opinion and try to connect you with some of the other bright minds we have here at TBR who can go deeper on the subject matter. So with that, let me put up what I call the Jackson Pollock. This is what I'm looking at. This is how my mind sees it, or doesn't. And the key point here, I think, the key takeaway that I don't think is a surprise, quite frankly, is that incumbency, the power of the incumbency in our industry right now is at an all-time low, because the change is radical, and it's a change that's over on the right. We used to live in a world that was on the left, when it was far less messy as it's depicted there. And so that really is the key point that I want to put on here. You can see the power of the incumbency. The example I'll use was the major deal with the government where Amazon Web Services beat out IBM. If there was ever an example of an old world and a new world vendor going head-to-head and the new world one winning, that was it. Certainly IBM is bringing a lot of resources to bear. I'm not sitting here calling the death of IBM by any stretch of the imagination, but that's an example where the power of the incumbency or the stature that one had just doesn't apply anymore. So with that, let me get into these definitions. The transitions didn't roll, so I'll just take a look at it for you as it is. What I have here is that I talk about a 2.0 world and a 3.0 world. Other people use second platform, third platform, and all these other things. But the 2.0 world is essentially the old world order. It was traditional on-premise data centers where the construction was constrained by the hardware. You basically determined what you could afford in terms of the silicon, and then you went backwards from there to determine what you could do. And Moore's Law was the rule there. Now, in the last event that I went to at IBM, the CTO, speaking for the FTG Analyst Insights, went out and made the claim that Moore's Law is dead. I don't disagree with it, to be perfectly blunt. Well, not necessarily dead, but it's no longer relevant. The new law, which I have jokingly down there called in the lower left Hal's Law, which, for those of you who don't know, that was the name of the computer in 2001: A Space Odyssey. It was a takeoff on IBM. If you just take each letter and bump it up one, you get to IBM. That is cloud-delivered solutions unleashed by analytics. And analytics is really the engine, or it's eating out, it's stripping labor out of the model is what that is doing, because the more you have analytics, the less you need the human interface to interact with the Phillips. Hal's now smarter than we are. And the center quotes are really what I consider the ominous piece. You have here Joe Tucci in his 4Q13 earnings call opening remarks talking about this being the most disruptive and yet most opportunistic transition in our 60-year history, and at this particular time, the pace of this transition is accelerating. Now jump over to Ginny Romney all of 2 days ago, and to be kind to Ginny, this was not a prepared remark. This was her reaction to a Q&A question that was, it was a high inside fastball rather than a softball, talking about crisis and why isn't IBM moving any faster and all these other things, which to me indicates a Wall Street analyst who truly doesn't understand our industry and what we're under. And I think they're doing our industry a disservice by taking such a short-term orientation. They're challenging EMC. They want them to break up. They're looking to try to strip the profit out of here that our firms are going to need to withstand the transitions and be able to invest the working capital in staying alive as they make the move. And so Ginny was there talking about this being unprecedented change. And those are the operative words. I've been in this thing for a long time. I was mentored by an individual who had started in the industry in the early 60s. I have never seen or been mentored on anything like what's going on today. So that's the backdrop. That is what I have been struggling with for about 2 years now. As I travel to various analyst events, I love going to those things. They're like gorp for the brain. I always come out of it with 1 or 2 aha moments, and I factor those into the Jackson Pollock prints. So with that, let me start by deconstructing the Jackson Pollock I put up prior to this slide. This piece, CP Storage IO, and those circles are to note, quote unquote, the pipe, was a picture that my mentor would put up on his whiteboard as he and I would go over issues. I know it by heart. And it was the industry as I knew it up until about 5 to 10 years ago you could explain and track the evolution of our industry by pointing to this simple chart and talking about where the constraints have been. You could talk about shadow IT and the wresting of control from mainframe down to mini. You could talk about PCs being on the desktop and spreadsheets and word processing packages outside of IT, the businesses that would spring up around that opportunity, and then IT having to come back and get control with LAN administrators or anything else. So the industry could be described by what was going on the underlying hardware engine that was the limiter to what you could buy for software and what kind of outputs you could generate. You had to have this in-house in order to get it done. And so the key trigger point that got me trying to figure out what to do with this simple diagram to explain what's going on in the industry today, when it really caught my attention, was in a briefing I was at in Madrid by IBM in December of 2012 by Dr. Matthias Kaiserswerth. I had gone in, I hadn't taken a look at hardware in a while. I figured I had to dust off my knowledge. And Matthias Kaiserswerth was talking, his terms, and the terms IBM has been using, is we've shifted from the tabulating computing era, punch cards, to the computing era, and now we're in the cognitive systems era. So when he talks the computing systems era, and basically CMOS, what he was talking about there was that with the existing technology as we had it, he envisioned about 1,000-fold price performance improvement in the iron. And that didn't really catch my attention. I've been seeing those hockey stick projections for 20 years. He then went on to talk about cognitive systems, and I can't call it price performance. I'll call it time to information. And in 20 years, what he said is we'll have 1,000,000-fold improvement in that. So that was what had me realizing the change in our industry is going to be drastically faster than anything we've seen before. If minis had a life of about 30 years, 1960, 1992 or so, PCs really started to take hold and knock us on our rears about 85 to 90, and you know they had about a 20-year life. What we're in the middle of today, I would guess 10 years tops. We're probably 2 years into it. We will not recognize our industry when we're finished, I believe. Some of what I'm going to talk about as I go through this will be the notion of ceteris paribus, hold all other things constant, think of the extreme. To me, the extreme is how much will finally migrate to the cloud, how much will stay in. The only things I know will stay on-prem will be the security of what you have and the IP that you've decided is so valuable you don't want to let it outside of your site. Beyond that, I am not sure which will go where. Now the change, and this hit me just last May in 2014 in the EMC world where Paul Moritz, anytime he speaks, I would stop and listen. He is a brilliant individual. And what he put up was a simple diagram that I could understand because I had the one on the left seared into my brain. The one on the right is what he calls the new data fabric. So this is the data fabric that is driven by Hal's law as opposed to the one on the left, which is a data fabric driven by Moore's law. And the key pieces here are apps, data, and analytics. Now, as you look at these two models, if you look at the top two on the 2.0 side, CPU and storage, our industry has moved those two pieces in and out, closer together and further apart. We're back to the new shiny object being flash storage. That sometimes resides on the CPU side. That sometimes is set up as its own array on the just as a dedicated store side. It's how close you can bring those two together to get over the bottleneck in the middle, which is the pipe or the wire, however you want to define that. Now, if you jump with me, unfortunately, I don't have it as the top two. It's apps and analytics. The reason I have analytics and I/O in those two spots is that's where the human interface comes in. That's why I have them that way. But apps and analytics, as we're hearing, as we're seeing it in the database wars, as we're seeing it in various applications, where does analytics sit? Does it sit in memory? Does it sit in the apps? Or is it set standalone, sort of sipping from the data lake, I believe, as Pivotal calls it? But the new drivers to our industry, the new way that we have to monetize, are going to be coming from this side of the shop. Now, that is radically different. And right now what we have is we're seeing the rapid margin erosion on the left. as we're seeing the net new opportunities born on the cloud companies springing up on the right-hand side. Now, that's to tell you that that was the old way that I knew to understand it. I had been working on trying to rationalize and factor in cloud into a model on the left when, you know, the light bulb went off that it doesn't matter, it's over on the right. And then I went back to the models and started to work my way through to explain what is happening on the conventional and legacy side. So the first thing to see, it's a very small change, is just rather than talk about an I/O, what you have here is the virtual desktop or the virtual device interface. Ezra Gottheil, who was on our team here, who was writing code for Lotus when I was selling dumb terminals for Arrow, is the lead analyst on that side. He would take vehement exception to just glibly putting up VDI. But the whole point here is this has challenged data centers irrespective or irregardless of everything I've just said from the simple standpoint of a single user having 3 or 4 different ways to get in and access your data, so that there's a whole management layer and a set of issues that hit that. There's a whole set of issues, the way you secure your data, the way security is measured and monitored, which we have a new benchmark coming out with Jane Wright, who's a very senior analyst who's been looking at security for a very long time. The other thing that you can see as a proof point here for what I'm saying is that the VC community, there was an article I read a couple months ago that most of the tech VC investment dollars are in new security startups, because the security layer, as you'll see on the next slide, has a lot more to do than just worry about the IT users having multiple devices going into an on-prem data center or a private cloud. It's these users with ubiquitous access to all sorts of different clouds, both for personal use and consumer use on the same devices, and you need to keep your IP coming out of the right secure. And that is a very large challenge on that end, on top of the typical challenges of private cloud, private hybrid, public, all those different permutations of what is going on the left. Now, quite frankly, what is going on the left is it's wringing the profits out of those things because the value is now perceived to be on the right. And the reason the value is on the right is because of the removal of the constraint of what IT can do for business being on the hardware side. You have to prove value before you can make that sale, and that value comes from the speed at which you can take your data that you have decided to capture, mine it with your applications, with the accelerant of analytics, and come up with sustainable competitive advantage or a value you can market to the outside world. So therefore, the key point, the way that we are going to succeed and survive as an industry rests in our ability to speak to the line of business and tell them what we have that will make their jobs easier or faster or give them a competitive advantage. That all sounds simple, but what is sitting within the middle of this is how do you make the bridge? How do you get all this to work together? You know, Larry Ellison in Oracle World, I read a quote, I can't remember specifically what it's about. I believe it was moving 12C from private cloud to public and back and forth, and talking about a simple push of a button. I did multiple custom engagement studies with people who are concerned with determining what is the single pane of glass needed for the management of all this fabric. It's single pane of glass for provisioning. It's single pane of glass for failover, for predictive maintenance, for preventative maintenance, for reactive maintenance, all in a dashboard, in theory, of enabling Homer Simpson to be at the dial of this massive plant for you because you've simplified it, you have made it elastic and flexible, so you only have to build what you need and you can rent it out for the balance. That is a massive fundamental difference in the way in which we're looking at IT in those environments. Now, all technology vendors are struggling to figure out how to do this. It's not as simple as everybody says. We have a gentleman on our staff who came to us from Dell, Stanley Stevens, who is taking a look at this with Christian Perry in our data center about software defined and how in some instances it's, it's still more hype than reality, that end customers are struggling with it. Part of what end customers struggle with, quite frankly, is that the skills required when you were able to take a look at the simple 2.0 hardware diagram and figure out what disk drive had to be pulled or what CPU was failing, that isn't the same skill set as you need to be working in a software-defined fabric. A simple error in the software-defined code will turn out the lights on the hardware, where if the hardware had been running in the old-fashioned model, the conventional model, that wouldn't be a problem. So there's a lot more going on there than the folks marketing the skill sets they have around software-defined. There's a lot more going on than meets the eye right now. But once that bridge, quite frankly, is the dam against the profit pools moving out of the left-hand side of this and flooding over to the right. The left-hand side is the analog dollars. The right-hand side is the digital pennies in terms of the marketing changes. And as a result, the business models, it's an acute challenge for the legacy vendors. It's an acute challenge for IBM. It's an acute challenge for HP. It's an acute challenge for Dell. Oracle has some struggles with it. SAP has some struggles with it. You have people that are competing with legacy applications and traditional pricing models going up against the one on the cloud. You have the hardware guys going up against a Rackspace or an Amazon or a Google. There's a lot that's moving at this point in time in our industry. And so in getting this done, and what you have to do is you've got to change how you go to market. You've got to change how you're structurally organized. So the first thing you have to do is you have to change how you message. And I had a bit of a struggle with the editors here. They do an incredibly good job, but they wanted me to take out flank sales. And I fought to keep that in, because that to me is a military term here, is that the sales engine is, and I heard this a lot with small businesses, early adopter SIs, the VAR who moved over into the cloud. And they struggle with what to do with sales. Because as you tell them they've got to move from a transactional selling model over to a subscription model, almost like the way you recruit college kids to sell life insurance. Hey, you got to take the hit, but as a subscription-based build, you'll make a lot of money. Those individuals in sales are still, your good ones, are still able to do it in the 2.0 way. They know how to do that, and if they're stubborn, they'll be sitting there saying, why do I want to shift the way I sell? I'm hitting my numbers as it is today. Well, folks, that bridge, that software-defined is the only thing that's propping you up to continue doing it that way, because once software-defined becomes easy, the walls are going to come tumbling down. So what you have to do is you have to start messaging into the lines of business. Now, this is a place where IBM this has been IBM's strength. It's in their DNA for years. You know, the joke was all the other hardware IT vendors were knocking on the doors in the data center, and IBM was getting the deal signed out in the golf course with the C-suite. Now, they're even taking it one step further. It's not just C-suite buyer persona. It's C-suite buyer persona by industry. It's another axis. It's a cube now rather than a matrix. And that is the subtle differentiation. That's one of the reasons we have research streams with end customers. We have research streams where we map between IT decision makers and line of business buyers. We have a whole syndicated portfolio that's been around now for 1.5 years, 2 years, very sophisticated, called Source IT, to take a look at the buying patterns and consumption preferences by industry. And it's pretty sophisticated stuff that was developed by our VP of Research, Stuart Williams, and a gentleman here by the name of Matt Healy, a peer of mine, another principal analyst, is taking the lead now that Stuart's more looking at the forward-thinking aspects of our research streams. But that messaging has got to shift while you still hold in the old model. So what does that mean from a selling perspective? I'll look at it for you from 2 ways. It is selling direct and selling indirect. This would be the direct selling. This is pretty dicey. You've got your IT decision makers, the IT lob, or the IT decision makers. They're starting to lose a little bit of their influence. Shadow IT, we've had it for years, as I referenced earlier, the shadow IT of PCs when they came in. You now have shadow IT as a service consumption by the lines of business. So it's eroded that vendor lock-in, it's eroded the need for scale. And if IT is not nimble and responsive, that IT as a service consumption will become even greater. So if you, as you're messaging out to the lines of business, you're flanking your traditional sales contacts, you have to be there with them to reassure them. Either reassure them that you have the metering and billing and provisioning skills so that they can do the chargebacks and be the internal cloud, for lack of a better word, to the IT departments, or more ominously, and it's something, quite frankly, that I think IBM is gearing up to do, is to become the cloud-enabled IT data center and cut them out of the process, if not entirely, very much so, such that the internal folks will be challenged and threatened by what is going on. So that's a dicey way to go in. You have to have very sophisticated marketing messages on that, and you need to reassure these skittish IT administrators, who some of them are going to be more concerned with the fiefdom they have in the power base by keeping this all on-prem rather than just monitoring a dashboard with everything off on Amazon, Google, or some community cloud with the necessary security layers for the industry that they're in. So that's a direct sell piece. The indirect sell has a lot. This is relationships. This is an area, it's an area where we're doing R&D calls with people, quite frankly, for 2015 about what kind of research streams we can develop in a syndicated fashion. We've done a lot of custom research around this. But this is the area, and this is an area I have a personal passion around, quite frankly. What we're hearing from various people is the idea that the number of independent agents, entities, resellers that are out there, that we're going to see north of 50% attrition in that space. And having been a gentleman who had to sign the documents for a Chapter 7 bankruptcy filing, I know the pain associated with that. I know what it does to people, and the extent to which any research streams we can come up with that can help here and minimize some of the personal impact that is going to go on as our industry consolidates will be a great benefit to me in the sort of last leg of my professional career. But what is going on here is it's gut-wrenching to me when I talk to these people. I have some standard research streams where I just ask them, as these people, say, take the VAR that figured it out a couple years ago and knew he had to get into a community cloud, and now they're trying to figure out how to marry that into hybrid cloud. And they don't have the scale. And if there's one thing these people that are in the channel all have in common is they lack the working capital to be able to absorb a lot of financial losses to make a transition. And they're in a lot of pain and they're struggling with it. You also have new versions of these reseller relationships, new people coming up that don't have that legacy knowledge. So they need skills training. They need some management consulting advice on how to restructure their business so they can keep the doors open. Now that's me advocating for the little guy. You as the large vendor, you quite clearly can't just throw money willy-nilly if half of them are going to go down. You've got to have almost your own work, think of it as a workout artist. You've got to be able to have somebody come down, take a look at their books, take a look at their vision of where they think their business ought to go, and make your best bet as to whether or not you ought to give them some money to get moving on that. We're hearing about shared risk models and all these other things, but you also hear these things, as I referenced earlier in the talk, about the sales reps. If you're a small business with 3, 4, 5 sales reps and you try to retool their comp plan and 1 or 2 of them leave on you, you've just lost 40% of your capacity, and they're probably 2 of your better ones, so you probably lost about 60 to 70% of the people holding your revenue base. So they're in a dicey move, and they've got to determine how to make the promises, because they're now the intermediary between you as, say, the arms dealer to them if it's selling a cloud-enabled service over into the end customer over on the right. And they're stuck in this situation, in some of the interviews I've done with these folks over the years, where you, the large vendor, still promise 8-hour turnaround on a repair or a diagnosis of a problem, and yet they have to commit to an SLA that says there'll be no downtime and put money in the game for the shared risk. Now, if they're not savvy business guys, and a lot of them aren't, they can get caught there. There's a big liability, and they need you to support them with that. So that is a way in which this whole thing has started to evolve to the point where when I speak with the channel partner marketing folks within the large firms, even they admit they cannot put up the traditional single slide of what the channel segmentation by account, by by channel business model looks like anymore because of the way it's turning into a spider web of partnerships. And there's no better recent market move to discuss this than the IBM move around open power. That is illustrative of about 3 or 4 different things all in one big, wonderful ball of wax. Number one, the business model transformation. Intel was a very traditional business model for the 2.0 world. ARM is an IP licensing model that scales it out, doesn't put up any money to worry about the risk of being the one to drive the adoption. So it's IP monetization in its purest form. Now, I was on the earnings call for ARM 2 days ago. Their pre-tax net, before tax net is 52 points. Intel's is about, it was hovering in, off the top of my head, it was between 25 and 30, and it's been going down. That's a radically different costing structure, and you also don't have to put the money up to go into it. The other piece, with IBM's had a history of shedding low-margin businesses. They spoke of selling off the chip foundry as a divestiture, but it's a divestiture where they're paying somebody $1.5 billion to take it off their hands in exchange for then buying back the chips out of that retooled foundry. I don't know if I call that a divestiture. I'm not sure what to call it, but when I think of a divestiture, I think you're getting some money back for it. So these are some of the things that are hitting in that channel. You cannot afford, really, to be putting a blue suit in if you're moving from analog dollars to digital pennies. So now to summarize this, to make sure I haven't missed anything yet, let's get into the final slide. What are the differences between the blue suit selling or analog dollars and add-to-cart selling and digital pennies? In the old model, you prospected, you qualified, and you closed. In the new model, you're intercepting them on the web where they're doing some digital research before they go. You're educating them on it, and you close it. In the old model, you went and sold FUD to IT, and you assured the lobs. In the new model, you go rapidly and quickly to sell outcomes to the lobs, and then you assure IT that you're not really a threat to them. In the old model, you used the partners to cut your selling expense. You needed the VAR to go out there and do that. You needed the VAR to go out there and do the repair and maintenance. In the new model, you're trying to partner to accelerate IP development because the cycles at which this thing is going to move, given everything is happening, if you believe Matthias Geisler's worth a million times faster, you've got to rapidly grab that IP, plug it into your model, and scale it as quickly as you can. In the 2.0 world, you went out and you spoke about the speeds and speeds. What was the iron? What could the iron do? In the new model, you're out there speaking about business. The old model was heavily reliant upon packaged products. The new model is automated IP driving services margin. And I'd like to stop here to say that the most ominous thing that I saw coming out of the IBM earnings announcement as I've been tracking them over the years was the hiccup on the services side on the operating margin improvement gains. It had been my belief, at least, and perhaps I was wrong, that they were doing very well at automating their services delivery operations in order to sustain the margins so that they could maintain the same profit pool. Now, if everybody else is copying this automated IP, because you don't have as long a window of that competitive advantage, and if they're taking that gain and cutting price right off the top, all that's going to do is accelerate the race to the bottom across all aspects of our industry, which is just going to quicken the pace of this disruption and wind up with faster and faster consolidations and breakups, which we have been seeing in the industry as Wall Street's been clamoring about EMC, HP splitting up, Symantec splitting up, IBM's dumping more and more over to the side. So if this thing quickens up, the volatility in our industry is going to worsen rather than lessen. And lastly, our last two, you sell strategy, you then install, and then you show results. In the new world, you have to access their data through freemium, show value, then sell service to upsell them and upgrade it. And that's a major, major shift. It also has impact with the professional services firms. We have a lot of good research coming from Patrick Heffernan, who came to us from Deloitte around management consulting. We look at the Indian Five. We have a whole slew of things that are going on there, and there's a lot of merger, partnering, and consolidation to go with it. And then lastly on this, how do you sell service? You used to do it the way I was taught how to do it way back when. Labor hours times the rate. How many hours for this body times what margin multiple? Now you're selling service by KPI measured results. That's the value of the outcome-based contracts. I've been speaking rather fast and furious. This is where I want to take a stop, come up for some air, and ask if there are any questions. As I said, if we cannot complete all the questions at this point in time, what we will do is I will commit that we will get back to you. Michael Elliott asked if I have written an article about this, and if so, I would love a copy. Michael, no, I have not. What I have done, however, is there are some articles I have written in a e-zine called Nearshore Americas. I co-wrote a lot of them with Patrick Heffernan, who I just referenced, because where it was, prior to last year being in engagement services, I was over in professional services, taking a look at services automation, global resource deployments, and the move within services and global services deployments. The early work and the way that we did it in our global delivery benchmark was really to drive for that notion of labor cost arbitrage. It was everybody getting it out of the United States into cheaper labor markets. That is, I don't want to say run its course, but there's a new piece of it that's starting to come up, which is that center of excellence. So we were tracking it to look for the low-cost pockets of low-cost labor. Now we have to bifurcate our research stream, take a look at that, but also look to see where are people amassing centers of excellence. And that typically is going to be around an area with a lot of university systems and low-cost labor. So you want to have them educated and then be available. There's also the boomerang in the United States, which is sort of rural sourcing. And I know that one. I have a daughter going to LSU, and it's talking about how Baton Rouge is an attractive area for that kind of stuff because people may want to stay there for the lifestyle choice. It's the reason why I think Xerox has a good play. They're up in upstate New York. That's for a quality of life for outdoorsy people. It's a great place to go. They have a good reputation for engineering innovation, and they ought to be able to recruit some talent up there. The other thing I was just told, I do have a blog. It was a personal blog. I haven't had a lot of time to write in there. I did write one about Watson the first time I heard about it, when it was talking about how you can quicken the time to diagnosis based on Watson Analytics, which really showed the win-win of technology in the sense of there's cost takeout, but there's also improved service. So that sort of answers that question. Is there any others? Okay. Is there anybody? What do we got? U.S. government amount of data to the public. Yes. Business model. See the new data. But, you know, I thank you for that question. I don't know who put it in, but let me. I meant to say more on the Internet of Things because that's a new piece. The fact that, as I said, in the old days, you went and you looked and said, I can afford so much disk, what can I do? And that was typically going to be constrained to the systems of record or the systems of transaction rather than systems of engagement or systems of interaction. But now that we've opened this up and we have analytics where we don't need humans involved to get these things, you can have machine-generated output for the Internet of Things. You can have machine-generated output. You know, GE is a company, even though you don't really think of them as, well, I think of them as technology because they used to have GE information systems back in the time-sharing days from jet aircraft engines, and they and McDonnell Douglas used to compete for what was a very kind of, you know, duct tape and baling wire version of cloud. So Internet of Things is definitely a play there. That's a play when you go, I'm going to jump if you don't mind. I want to go back up to the picture. That's really, you know, how are you getting the data in there, right? That was why I didn't have, that's why I had analytics on the bottom. Analytics has to be in there in order for you. That's where the humans come in. They have to think about what's generated and then come back with another query through analytics up into apps and data. Where you get the data, if you can get it machine to machine, you can get it from smartphones, you can get it from refrigerators, toasters, jet engines, you name it. You can use it to be smarter at how you go drill for oil. I know from management consulting, talking to Patrick, oil and gas exploration, particularly in Latin America, I think, Patrick should speak to this, but I believe he's been saying Latin America. These are areas where analytics and data and the continuing generation of that is going to make us smarter, more efficient, hopefully kinder to the planet as we go. I refer to digital pennies. Does that mean that the new paradigm will be a lower revenue and a lower profit? Yes. Let me try to give you some examples of that. I got a ton of them, but I'll give you an example for management consulting firms. This is one that I think is probably keeping them awake at night. We all know management consulting firms are a partnership. And it was an example I was given by someone. I'm going to be I'm cutting log links here and not matchsticks, but what they said is a typical rip and replace for a legacy Siebel install is 10 months and $500,000. Just to, you want the new version, here's what it's going to take. So think of all the bodies you need to get that done. 10 months, you can forecast your workloads, you can do all that. If somebody says, I don't want Siebel, I want to go to Salesforce, that's what I want to do. That's 3 months, that's $75,000, right? So run the numbers. You need to have transactionally 4 times the deals, so therefore your sales expense to deal has to be a quarter. You've got to cut it. You've got to be more efficient on how you go to market, your SDN now, because you've got to have more transactions for the same SDN dollar to get the same revenue, and now your resource and forecast planning is going to be a bigger challenge. So that is a way, that's one way to look at it. Another way, some examples I like to use was analog dollars, digital pennies, is just look at what happened to the newspaper industry because they gave the internet away for free, and when they went to charge for it, nobody would get it. Analog dollars, digital pennies, music, entertainment. Okay, that's one. The questions are coming quick. I'm trying to get as many of them in as I can. All right, what's your view on the ARM, AMD, Intel competition? That's a great one. I wish I could, Let's look at that. I don't think it's just ARM, AMD. I don't know I think of AMD as, I've got to be careful. This is an area where my knowledge is about an inch deep. So remember, this is opinion, folks. But Intel was clearly the dominant player there. AMD, we had to keep AMD alive so the Department of Justice wouldn't break up Intel, right? You got to have a second alternative. ARM's coming at it from an entirely different value proposition. They're not vertically integrated. So they're giving more of the profit pool to the people who will innovate around it. And that's what IBM's doing. As it was Matthias Kaiserswerth 2 years ago who said rhetorically in the room, who else besides us and Intel can continue to invest in chip innovation? Well, you could argue ARM can, right? So in the earnings call that ARM was talking about, they're heading into infrastructure and servers. They're not quite there. They dominate the handhelds in that space, and they're ubiquitous, and they're in the Internet of Things and all these other places. But if everybody else is kind of conceding defeat on the CPU investment side, then what you have is innovation going on. It's got to go on out in the community, and they're going to get more of the profit pool than Intel's willing to give up. So ARM has a very attractive play there. IBM is coming in, and they're opening it up that way. They're opening up open power. I saw a question fly by about China. Let me dive that into this as well. What is going on with China? We started taking a look at that when IBM had a hiccup. I think it was 3Q13 when it really took a deep drop. So Patrick Heffernan and I and a couple others started taking a look at it. And there's that notion of indigenous IP to, what China develops for IP they want to keep there. So by having open power, right now I believe the number was they have over 60 partners for this. Some of them are server manufacturers. Some of them are based in China. So therefore, what we've got going on here is they can take our base layer IP, they can develop it so it's indigenous to China. The example that was given is that Power has sort of security protocols in it. China wanted to bake in their own security protocols on top of that platform layer that IBM has out that's open, and maybe it stays in China, maybe it doesn't. But they'll have their own board manufacturers, and IBM will get the royalties to continue to invest in the IP that folks like Matthias Kaiserswerth and Paul Moritz and Gelsinger and those guys, the bright minds, are building. What else we got? You seem to show MSPs, channel partners, playing in the lower left public area. Where, how does the MSP play in 3.0 on the right? They play in 3.0 on the right as being the broker. You go back to the, the black hat in the middle, the software defined. Some of that software defined is to be a broker for cloud provisioning. Or if you were an old VAR, you're there, you go out and do the flying screwdriver repairs for whatever's on-prem. You also kind of aggregate a single bill for whatever cloud provisioning is needed from the left-hand side. So the MSP has a role in being the Sherpa guide or the commodities broker, for lack of a better word, to pull out the compute and store instances you need as you're ripping the calls on the right-hand side. Their challenge to that, it's one of the IDIs I've done recently that, God, I lay awake at night thinking about it. Is that, again, I go, what were your successes and failures 2 years ago? What are you looking for? What are you excited about 2 years from now? What are you chewing the inside of your mouth over? Is this bar to MSP, business model transition CXO said he doesn't know how to price in the new world. And I go, well, what do you mean? He says, well, the traditional old way you did it, you dropped the iron, say, every 3 years, you did a rip and replace of the iron, and then you had 2 years of services, let's say you dropped it for $100,000, you got $15,000 a year to monitor and maintain it. Now they've jumped over to the public cloud. They want to go to Amazon. I can't remember who. It was either Amazon or Google, to be blunt. And what he's doing is trying to price managed services on top of their public cloud consumption model. And the end customer came back and said, I don't want to pay for that because I can look at the metering coming out of, coming off the dashboard from the public cloud purveyor, and why am I paying you when, the dials aren't moving? So he can't price his product or his service. So I know we all have a lot of challenges and struggles going around here. We also, you folks also have a lot of working capital to go with. How'd you like to be a guy with a payroll of about 20 that he considers a family, laying awake at night trying to figure out how to monetize what he does so he doesn't have to put all those families in jeopardy? If you don't think that gives people ulcers, you haven't been a small business owner. What else we got? IT data. SDN is all part of the same. Which one should be deployed? I think the first thing that needs to be done for the competitive advantage of the end customer is you're going to get the data. The Paul Moritz line there was store everything, analyze anything. And that goes to the monetization shifts, and it's happening. I've seen it with some vertical-specific SIs with analytics-baked applications, because that's the difference between an application that's a system of record versus one that's a system of engagement. The system of record, you've got so many. You can monitor the transactions, and you knew where you had your spikes. Like if you're doing inventory, the inventory check at the end of the quarter, the end of the year, you knew you had that spike. So that's the system of transaction. The system of engagement or the queries, when you pull for the analytics, that's going to be the big spike. That's why elastic infrastructure for bursty applications is the fashion-forward application set. So what's going on there? You move the question. I'm losing my train of thought. Referring, where was it? Which one was it? That one. Yes. All right. So big data is the first place to go. You've got to store it. You've got to have the information. Then you can figure out how to manipulate it. And this is a point that it was a Simplicity product manager for EMC, the EMC world, who said this to me, and it was another one of the ahas for me, is disk sales on the left, because data is so valuable on the right, because you need them to run through analytics to get to the outcome. So the disk storage is a derived decision. You're nobody's going to say, oh, you can't store that because we can't afford the disk. They may say to you, what the hell do you want that data for? But they're not going to say we can't afford it. So that disk is a derived decision. And the way the Simplicity product manager said it to me, because I asked, well, how are you? Remember, they're flanking sales with the rower on the right. Sales is still taking breaking the glass at the data center to get in to talk to the IT administrator or whomever. He said it's simple. All I have to tell them is every dollar of simplicity you sell, it will drag $3 to $5 in disk. It's the one place in the market, as my mentor over in the 2.0 world used to say, is you don't necessarily want to be out in West Texas drilling for oil, but it's okay to be the guy at the general store back in the Wildcat oil days selling the pipe, because you make money whether they strike oil or they don't. So being in storage, some of the forecasts have the total storage demand doubling every 18 months. That's a pretty good CAGR if you're in disk. So the way that monetization is going now is that, it's free to store the information with us, and then we'll charge you every time you run a query. So again, the monetization is to the IP value. When you want to run the analytics, we'll charge you to go get at your data and run it through our app, or whether apps and analytics are close together or they aren't. That's where we're going to go with it. All right, that's that one. What else you got?
All right, I believe that's it. All right, well, thanks, Jeff, and thank you, everyone, for your questions. You can follow both Jeff and TBR on Twitter, and please check out our pages on SlideShare and YouTube. But before you sign off, we'd like to take a brief survey about today's webinar. As we research performance of technology companies, we're also studying how we're helping our clients, and your feedback would be greatly appreciated. We'll leave the chat function on for another 5 minutes or so to give folks a chance to ask any last-minute questions. So ask away. Otherwise, thank you for joining.
Right. If I can just go into the, well, let me get up. What I wanted to say is we are always, TBR loves to be of service to its clients. You all are clients in one way or another. What I'm trying to do is toggle up so you can see my contact information. I encourage you, if you have any questions, if anything comes up, to feel free to send me an email. If it's something I cannot field, I will CC a person here within our team who I believe is a better person to talk to you about it. But please, do not hesitate to contact us. There's a lot to learn about in the industry. I believe that conversations with clients, I learn as much as hopefully I impart something that's helpful to you as well. But we encourage interaction. What's going on is unprecedented, and I think we can all use the ability to kind of, huddle together and get inside a tent during this rainstorm and see what we can do to weather it. So I thank you for your participation. I thank you for your time, and I hope it was of value.